deux témoignages, un sur le territoire Europe et l'autre sur le territoire monde quasiment. Je vais demander à Thomas BECKER, délégué général de l'EWEA, European Wind Energy Association, de bien vouloir nous rejoindre sur scène, et David Terry, qui est le directeur général de NASEO, National Association of State Energy Offices aux États-Unis. David Terry, could you please join us? Alors, on va commencer avec Thomas BECKER pour l'Association européenne de l'énergie éolienne. Réaction du représentant des acteurs européens à ce que l'on vient d'entendre, de l'Inspection générale des finances, de la CRE, le point de vue de l'économiste, le point de vue des acteurs de l'éolien. L'éolien est accusé de coûter cher. Alors, Thomas BECKER vient juste de me demander la possibilité de s'exprimer. Il comprend très bien le français. Vous pourrez échanger à l'heure du déjeuner, là, dans pas très longtemps, avec lui en français, mais il sera un petit peu plus à l'aise. So, Thomas, is wind cheap or not? It will start. No problem. It's
okay.
Automatic mic.
Thank you.
So,
Thank
what do you think about what you have heard this morning? And is wind cheap or not? And what is your track record on the whole members of EWEA?
Well, if wind is cheap or not, I would try to put it into a broader picture. I think what is hampering competitiveness in Europe today, more than anything, is our dependence on import of fossil fuels. We import in the EU net 54% of our energy need. 54% has risen from 51% in 2001 to now 54%, which means that Europe is completely dependent on international pricing. And furthermore, with the economic recession and with the growth economies in the rest of the world, we are not a price definer, we are a price taker, which means we are not defining the price on the wholesale market of international, especially, of course, oil, but also coal, etc. That is hampering our, in my opinion, our competitiveness, and therefore, let's say, not hampering the price. Now, then you, of course, will ask me, but still, Mr. BECKER, is wind energy not too expensive? Well, expensive, that depends what you mean. If you count into the price the subsidies, the enormous subsidies that we are giving in the EU, directly or indirectly, to fossil fuel, and if you include that into the price, I mean, include the externalities that right now in the energy reality that we have out there are not included, then wind is very cheap. So, because we are heavily subsidizing coal, oil, and I'm sorry to say, I know I'm in France, but nuclear, wind can be perceived as being a little expensive. And then again, Mr. Chair, having said that, the price of wind is going down as we speak. In many areas in Europe today, onshore, I have to say, onshore, wind can compete on the pure price, even with gas, coal, oil, and nuclear that is being heavily subsidized on electricity price. So no, and that is, let's say, the conclusion of my intervention, I think wind is not at all expensive.
You just say the price is going down as we speak, but we must continue to support the project. So according to EWEA, what is the best way to support the project? Are you more feed-in tariff or more call for tender or anything else, or the market? What do you think?
Well, the ideal scenario, of course, is that we start pricing our behavior. That in all other senses of life, if I want to, let's say, drive a big car, it's more expensive. Not only in gasoline is more expensive, but also the price that I have to pay because it's a big engine and I pollute more. That is, let's say, society's response to my behavior. However, when you talk about the energy as such, as whether you consume energy from green energy or from fossil fuel, that is not at all, that price signal or that behavioral signal is not included in the price. So of course, I think that if society would start internalizing those externalities, I think that would be the ideal scenario. If society does not do that, then I think it is more than fair to say, okay, we would like to have an energy future without being dependent of the Middle East and, well, recently Russia, as you have seen. So we would like to be independent of those. We would like to emit less CO2. We would like to produce the energy in our own countries, and we would like to create a lot of employment and polytechnical skills within the EU. So therefore, as in many other things in life, we decide that we give this sort of energy, namely the wind, a preference. And that could be a feed-in tariff, that could be auctioning, that can be whatever. But that is, of course, not, let's say, the ideal scenario. The ideal scenario is that you start actually pricing the cost for society of the different energy forms, and there, wind is very competitive in that scenario. And Mr. Chair, let me let me just add one thing. I mean, in France, you are known for, and you are famous for deciding upon infrastructural changes in your society, which you then do. And I actually, that's one of the things that I really admire about France. Let me just mention the triumph. What do you call it? The high-speed train. Yes, the high-speed train. The big changes made by Mitterrand in Paris, whatever. And there is nobody in your country who is then questioning whether the society, whether the state shall give, for example, the TGV preference. That, of course, we want that train to go to Marseille because we think it is important that people can travel rapidly to Marseille in a train. That's a good that society gets, and of course the government is behind that. Highly subsidized, but it's to the goods, it's to the benefit of society. So why is then different when it is with changing our energy pattern? If the society has decided that we will want to go away from being dependent, emit a lot of CO2, and not having, let's say, control over our own energy, if that is what society wants, then society has to take that decision and do what it takes.
Anyway, Thomas, you listened to my questions to the different speakers concerning the equivalent of full-time jobs. What do you think about that? Do you think we are ambitious enough with something like 10 or 12 maximum full-time job to launch a big program? What is your experience in Europe?
Was that?
Yes, it was
Sorry,
for you.
sorry.
You listened to my question to the different speaker concerning the full-time equivalent jobs. So do you think we are ambitious enough with something like 10 equivalent full-time jobs to launch such a huge program? It's enough for us, you think?
I can't answer that question. I'm not familiar enough.
I asked to each of the speakers, how many full-time equivalent jobs do you have in your structure? And for example, at ADEME, we have 2.5 people working on the wind activities. We have, apart from our RTE, Dominique Maillard, who said 8,500 people. Do you think we have enough people in France to launch such a TGV project for wind energy, wind activities?
In France?
Yes.
Of course, you have enormous polytechnical skills in France. You have a proud tradition of engineers.
Are they working on the wind activities?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, that would be to you. I think actually, it is now presented as if it is Donald Tusk who invented the energy union. I think that your government said it actually earlier. They just did not define it as an energy union, but your government pointed out that Europe should become the world champion of renewables, that this should be, the industrial project of our times. I think that's very visionary, and I think that, let's say, a combination of the German-French axe, so to say, in that sense, is the ideal scenario. I'm often asking myself, when I travel around in the UK, especially in the UK, you have a lot of resistance against wind, as in France, by the way. I keep on asking the question, what are you going to live off in the future? Where is the new big Rolls-Royce project? Where is the new big Rover factory? Where is the industrial project that you will live off in the future? And they have no, they have no answer to that, because they are very much supported by the City of London, and the rest of the UK, as you know, doesn't have much industry. To me, and that's, France is different because you do have industry, but to me, the fact that Europe is and could become even a stronger world champion in delivering these new technologies, and the fact that these technologies are needed worldwide and are demanded worldwide and will be even more, to me is evident that Europe should take up that chance and be the place where wind, as well as other, let's say, new technologies, we don't know what's out there the next 20, 30 years, the place where these things are invented, calibrated, and produced. And that's an excellent opportunity for us to, let's say, restate ourselves as industrial leaders in the world. Wind and wind turbines is something which is very, very difficult. It takes a lot of R&D and it demands very qualified staff, which we have in Europe. We have a lot of it, actually. We have more probably than anywhere else in the world. So I think it's quite natural.
Thank you, Thomas BECKER. The second testimony is David Terry. You are CEO of NASEO, National Association for State Energy Offices. And to finish this roundtable, you will give us your point of view about what is happening. You prepare some slides.
Maybe we'll skip some, but yeah.
You will skip some because you have something like 18. They send me a message.
Just a few.
Okay, only 3?
Well, we just used a few of the 18.
Oh, if you can do that, okay, wonderful. So, maybe before the slide, what is your exact role of the role of NASEO in the United States?
To give a little background, my organization represents the state energy officials in all 50 states across the United States, and Our energy sector, from a policy perspective, is really divided in the state government between two bodies in every state. One is a regulatory one that generally appointed by the governor, sometimes elected, that regulates the electricity industry, the operations of the system. The other is the policy apparatus, and that's the State Energy Office that advises the governor and the legislature about what policy or legislation should be passed that the regulators typically then follow and implement. So those are the two pieces. Our organization represents that policy side. And with regard to renewable energy, really the best example of the leadership role they've taken in wind energy in particular were the passage of renewable electricity standards or mandates beginning back in 1983 and now exist in 29 states. So a little background, our members are really focused on ensuring that efficiency, renewable energy, the security of the overall energy system, both liquid fuels and electricity, is maintained and has a particular lens on economic development. That's a key driver in what they do. Sure.
Yes. Okay, so maybe with a slide you can give us an overview of what is happening in the US and
Yes.
In general on the renewable energies, and maybe with a focus on the wind activities.
Okay. If we can go ahead a few slides, I'll stop you in a moment. I've covered the beginning here. Continue. 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 There we go. This is really what I...
Just one second.
Sure.
Ne soyez pas frustrés qu'on passe si rapidement les slides, mais on doit déjeuner bientôt. Vous les aurez, tout ce qui a été présenté comme diapositive, les fichiers seront mis en ligne sur le site du syndicat des énergies renouvelables. Sorry for that.
Thank you. This is really what I wanted to focus on. There are two or three pieces to wind energy development in the United States and what's driven it. And one of the primary pieces are the renewable energy standards. This map is necessarily kind of messy. The policy is driven at the state level. Those states that are shaded in red and orange in the map have renewable energy standards or mandates. A few of the states, they're only goals, but in general, these are mandates or requirements to meet certain levels of renewable electricity production and use over a period of years. Most of those requirements were put in place prior to, say, 5 years ago. There's not a very strong appetite to enact new ones. However, the standards that are in place have upheld over time through one governor to the next, one legislature to the next, but combined with federal tax incentives have really driven renewables development for the most part in the US. I think one interesting thing to note, if you're not familiar, the wind energy tax credit at the federal level, which helped drive development, expired about a year ago. It's up for renewal. It's unclear if it will be renewed. But absent that, these standards in these 29 states that require renewable energy development at a certain level are really what's driving the industry. The vast majority of the renewable energy needs under these mandates are being met by wind, some 85 to 90% of that. Next slide. There's a few state examples, and I think North Carolina and Iowa present maybe a good way to look at this, the differentiation from one state to the next. Iowa was the first state that passed a renewable electricity standard and really was a small goal. They started out very small and it expanded over time. They're a major wind producer, obviously, I think many of you know. North Carolina had a much more nuanced approach where it ramped up over a period of time, but there were also cost constraints. Well, there was a requirement and a mandate, and that's being met over time. It has to be done within certain economic parameters, otherwise it doesn't move forward. That continues to move forward, however, and you can see some of the detail there. Next slide. There are also a variety of tax credits at the state level, as I mentioned. Excuse me. As I mentioned, the federal tax credit is, for the moment at least, gone, not anticipated to be extended for a long period of time. So the state tax credits that are in place are the only real financial incentives that are there beyond the mandates. Next slide. A quick picture, some of you may be familiar with these figures, but I thought it important to show really the path of growth overall. This most recent report that was done by the US Department of Energy just a few months ago shows 61 gigawatts of total installed capacity with dramatic increases, as in most places in the world. This is almost all land-based onshore in the U.S., of course, with dramatically larger turbines, et cetera. This report gives a good detail, so I wanted to include it for reference. Next. I think this is probably the biggest trend that we see within wind. The projects are certainly getting larger. They're being driven increasingly by low cost. You'll note something in common with items 3, 4, 5, and 6. Those are all very high quality wind areas in the US, where the cost of production at a major wind field is typically at or below the cost of natural gas electricity production. The quality of the wind is extraordinary. Most recently, the Wyoming project, number 4. It's a $4 billion investment. It'll be the largest wind farm in the US when it's completed, 2,100 megawatts. The other interesting piece is the size of the compressed air storage that's to be associated with it at 12,000 megawatts. So a significant change, a significant project that will primarily be delivering power to California. That's its primary purpose. Next slide. This really just shows the price scale that we see happening in the U.S. over the last couple of years. The power purchase agreements are long-term contracts for wind. The prices continue to fall. Much of that's reflected by the power quality, the wind quality that we see in the central portion of the U.S. in states like Nebraska, Kansas, et cetera, where those large projects are coming into play. Next slide. And this is just another way of looking at that with neutral level, no fuel costs over time, and projected gas prices from the U.S. Energy Information Administration showing wind quite competitive. There is another side to this story, though, which I think is maybe the important takeaway on the next slide, dealing with transmission. In the case of the U.S., transmission policy is fairly complicated. It is largely left to the purview of individual states. So while it's true we have substantial wind capacity, very high quality, very low cost of production, it is stranded in the central part of the U.S. With no great ability to move it to the markets and population centers on the east and west coast. And because transmission is done really on a state-by-state approval basis, it makes it very difficult. One state may not see a compelling economic case to help and agree to the cost of extending the line through their customers. So the wind becomes effectively stranded. There are some changes at the federal level regulating interstate transmission. It's referred to as the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, Order 1000, that will require states to cooperate on a regional basis to expand transmission. It's a very long-term process, but I think it really points to the cost focus that we have in the U.S. that really comes economic development first. Certainly the environment is secondary in the development of these projects and the development of transmission. Next slide. The best example, and I think many may be aware of this, but it continues to deliver amazing benefits. It's a transmission infrastructure project that was set in motion by the Texas legislature, the Competitive Renewable Energy Zone, which resulted in the dramatic expansion of transmission in Texas. What's unique about Texas is because it is essentially all one grid within the state, they needn't have agreements with other states to extend the transmission, so therefore they could move forward. The next slide. This has resulted in nearly 3,600 miles of transmission being constructed within Texas. That is largely complete, a $7 billion investment, and the resulting wind projects that will come from that are quite dramatic. Despite the significant capacity that already exists, over 12,000 megawatts, there are 7,000 megawatts under development, much of that due to the expansion of those transmission lines. So it is probably the most dramatic example of where transmission can truly unlock the value of the wind resource. And it's something that we are frequently pointing to as we talk with new governors, new energy advisors to those governors, our members, about considering the value beyond their state's borders of extending transmission and the regional prospects from an economic development perspective and certainly from an environmental and climate perspective. I think that may be the last slide. I think just to sort of wrap this portion up, the difficult transition that that's underway in the electric sector in the U.S. is fairly dramatic. I've been in this area for 25 or 26 years working on renewable energy policies, electricity, efficiency, et cetera. The natural gas boom that we have in the U.S. Is certainly driving electricity production, new sources of generation. Wind, I think, will continue to grow, but it will be constrained by transmission. Even though the cost of production is low in those wind resource areas we mentioned, the inability to construct transmission easily and the cost of constructing that transmission relative to siting new gas generation will be a major challenge, I think, going forward.
You're speaking about gas or shale gas, and when you speak about energy transition in the US, is it from oil and coal towards renewable energy, or from oil and coal towards shale gas?
Shale gas, and from coal to shale gas primarily. We are at about 60% gas-fired electricity generation now, a tremendous amount of that coming from shale gas, increasingly so.
So it's a very big risk for renewable energy.
It's a tremendous risk in the sense that even though the cost of production is low, the cost of expanding transmission is significant. So the states will need to make a choice about the amount of transmission they determine as cost-effective to build that would unlock that wind power versus simply establishing additional natural gas-fired generation, which may be cheaper when transmission is included.
And you're certainly aware about the impact in Europe on
Yes.
coal
Yes.
and the impact on the renewable energy
Yes.
due to the coal prices.
Yes, it's quite significant. And I think we face some of the same challenges in the U.S., and I don't see a significant change. The pressure, I think, on price became greater following the economic crisis. There's a much greater sensitivity among the governors and certainly the Congress, U.S. Congress, about price pressure, upward price pressure on electricity in particular, and I think a tendency to forestall some action on carbon and climate as a result.
Thank you, David, for this accurate testimony. Thomas Becker, what do you think about the impact of what we have heard on the wind energy activities in Europe?
Well, I mean, I will abstain from, giving scores to other countries. You should refrain from that. But of course, it does have the, let's say, unintended effect in Europe that while we do not have a real price signal on CO2, because the ETS system is, let's just say it, it's not functioning. We installed this ETS system and everybody was happy, but then we put so many quotas into the system that if in effect it doesn't have any price signal, which with the result that today you can import, sorry to say, the cheap coal from the United States, and just one very absurd example, Mr. Chair. At the moment, you probably know this, earlier, southern Germany absorbed quite a lot of electricity from French nuclear installation in eastern France. That has almost stopped now because it is cheaper to fire cheap coal at old, completely depreciated coal power plants in southern Germany than to import the fossil-free and the CO2-free electricity from France. That just shows how perverted our system in Europe at the moment is. That we are spending billions of euros in combating climate change while we have this completely clear, open perversion of the system, and we allow it. So, but Mr. Chair, can I just say one and by the way, the greenhouse gas emissions in the United States are going up. You know, you're hearing right now that the CO2 is going down because of fracking. That's true. But all the aggressive gases that is a result of the fracking are going up, which means that in general, the United States is increasing its greenhouse gas emission quite dramatically, as is unfortunately now Germany also because of the coal. Chair, let me just come back to one point. Of course, I should have said very clearly earlier that the intention for the whole industry is, of course, that the price on wind goes down. No discussion of that. And there are many ways of driving it down. One very clear way is the scale. I mean, if you have the more wind turbines you have and produce and deploy, the cheaper it is getting. And of course, there we have a challenge as an industry with the present price on offshore wind. I'm sure something will happen there, but at the moment it's a challenge to face the politicians with the prices that are on offshore wind. And then final point, Mr. Chair, just to put our industry into a perspective, even if we are mourning and saying everything is difficult, etc., etc., the projection of the IEA in Paris, which I trust always because that's, I think, the most credible information, is that in 2020 the wind will meet between 14 and 16% of the electricity demand in Europe in general, and in 30 wind will cover between 25 and 40% of the need in Europe. That's their projection, whatever we discuss here. So in essence, wind will become, let's say, the backbone of the electricity provision in Europe by 2030. The wind will, according to the IEA, take the role that coal and nuclear has today. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas Becker. Pour renforcer ce que Thomas vient de dire à l'instant, notamment concernant l'impact du développement du charbon, enfin du redéveloppement du charbon à certains endroits. J'étais en train de regarder au moment où on est en train de parler, enfin il y a un quart d'heure à peu près, sur le site RTE Economics, quand même assez intéressant. On ne consomme pas énormément, on est à peu près à 60 000 mégawatts. Là, on va être à 60 000 mégawatts en milieu de journée. On a 43 900, allez, 44 000 de nucléaire. Sur les 63 000 qui sont installés, nous n'en utilisons que 44 000 en ce moment. On a 4 000 d'éolien, bravo messieurs les acteurs de l'éolien, 1 500 de solaire, et on a 2 000 mégawatts de charbon qui sont en train de tourner. La question est simple, que se serait-il passé si on était allé plus vite dans notre programme éolien et qu'au lieu de faire tourner seulement 4 gigawatts d'éolien aujourd'hui, on en aurait fait tourner 6 ? Peut-être qu'on aurait pu arrêter ces centrales charbon. Merci pour ces deux témoignages. Merci, messieurs, d'avoir participé à cette table ronde. Et je vous propose maintenant d'aller discuter avec eux, de leur poser toutes les questions que vous voulez pendant l'heure du déjeuner, parce qu'il est déjà 13h10. Merci beaucoup. Alors, le déjeuner a lieu, vous allez le trouver, on m'a envoyé un message pour me dire exactement où il avait lieu. Il suffit que je le retrouve, c'est dans la salle Jeanne, dans l'espace Jeanne de Flandre. Bon appétit à tous.